Now, as the world progresses towards the ambitious targets set by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, the voices of young people have become increasingly pivotal. PwC's reports delved into the sentiments and expectations of South African youth regarding the SDGs, emphasizing their call for heightened action from private businesses. Now, the SDGs, encompassing about 17 comprehensive targets, aim to foster sustained and inclusive economic growth, thereby addressing South Africa's present challenges of issues around poverty, inequality, and unemployment. This morning, I'm joined by Christie Viljoen, a senior economist and a senior manager at PwC South Africa. Christie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, let me get your first response before we go on a short break. How do young South Africans perceive the contributions of private businesses towards achieving the SDG goals? And what specific examples can you cite as probably the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of these contributions by the private sector?
Well, our information is coming from a global youth survey that PwC conducted, and we focused on the South Africa results. It showed us that about 40% of the young people we spoke to think that private business is doing enough to support the SDGs. Now, that obviously leaves another 60% not being completely convinced. So it is a bit of a mixed reaction, not too bad or too good on either side. I think when young people think of where private business is helping on some of these big challenges, one of them is related to hunger. I think about the fourth most important when we ask young people what their priorities are. And a big business, whether it's retail, food manufacturing, agri companies, many of them are involved in feeding schemes. And often this happens at a school level, where young children come to school, they haven't been able to eat due to their circumstances where they live in poverty. And then school feeding systems, both by the government and the private sector, is supporting them in actually with their nutrition. So that is why some of the people are saying, we can see what's being done, but as always, there's a bigger need, and that's why most young people would say there's still a need for more to be done.
Of course, there's a bigger need, but it seems as though South African youths are mixing up the roles of NGOs and private businesses. I'd like you to identify their roles as regards the needs of these youths when it comes to supporting SDGs, and what expectations that you would be hoping for in terms of these two areas. I will take your response after this short break, all right? So when we return on the show, Christie, I'll have you respond to that. Just stay with us. We'll be back in a bit. Well, earlier on, I told you that South African youth are demanding that private businesses will do more and be more involved when it comes to actualizing sustainable development goals, about 17 of them in South Africa. And they say that it will promote inclusive economic growth while also trying as much as possible to eliminate poverty, inequality, and reduce the unemployment rate in the country. I have Christie Viljoen, senior economist and senior manager at PwC Africa. Of course, Christie, I was asking you the other time before we went on that break that what is the mix-up as regards NGOs and, of course, private businesses, as it were, in terms of the role they need to play in actualizing or in supporting SDGs, because there's a lot of demand, as you have stated, but there seems to be an overlap or maybe a misconstruction of how these two entities should play their part.
Out from our surveys that South African youth told us that community organizations and other non-governmental organizations are the ones that they see as having the most impact on the sustainable development goals. And that's quite understandable, because where many of these young people live, the real support that they're getting outside of their communities coming in would be these kinds of NGOs, community organizations, so they can see how these people are making an impact on their lives, whether it is water quality, education, health, wherever that connection might be. At the other end of the spectrum, they probably see less activity by the private sector, because private sector is often seen as big buildings, big offices in the middle of the city, and not everywhere where young people are. Your question about where can these two maybe connect with each other? Now, that's a nexus that our government supports, and it's something that a lot of big businesses are working towards. Big business wanting to make a difference in rural areas, impoverished areas, areas that need support when it comes to these key SDG elements. And the most important step is to work on that with help and support and networks of community organizations. These entities know the people. They know the area, they know the geography. They can look beyond the data and understand where the real challenges and problems are. So I think that if we want to improve this overall situation, we need to make sure that the community organizations and NGOs work much closer with private sector, and then also government. Government has a role to play in this in local and national government as well. It's in South Africa, we often talk about the social partners. That would be government, private sector, labor, community organizations. It requires all of them to work together towards these goals. It's not a government job. It's not a private sector job. It's not a community job. Everything needs to work together. Otherwise, we're not going to make progress on many of these goals.
Okay, you've emphasized collaboration, and you've talked about that on the part of most especially the NGOs and the private businesses. But then let's click down to the young people themselves that should be involved in actualizing this. What would you say are the primary barriers when it comes to youth participation in translating the support of these NDGs into actionable steps? And how do you think these barriers can be addressed?
I think if we maybe compare South Africa, many African countries, to those we see in the developed north, young people in the developed north have much greater access to public resources like transport. They've got much cheaper communication technology. They have much greater opportunities to have an influence on these development goals. Then we look at the African countries where a lot of youth grow up in impoverished areas, maybe far and rural areas where there's very few connections in terms of transport communication. So they physically have fewer opportunities to be involved. Again, the community organizations, the non-governmental organizations that are already working in these areas, that would be the channel through which government and private sector can then be able to enable these youth to play a bigger role. South Africa has a very high youth unemployment rate. It's amongst the highest in the world. We've got so many young people that want to do something to improve their own situation and their community situation. There is a willingness and an ability to do so, but they need the chance, they need the opportunity, and that's where public and private sector need to jump in, be able to open the door for them so that they can, for example, become a social entrepreneur. Now that means you start a business that solves a social challenge. It pays you a salary, but it's focused on helping the community. So that's going to be the channel. You have to work through community organizations to actually give these young people an opportunity to get up and get a foot in the door.
But there seems to be some sort of miscommunication on the part of these private businesses and the youth, because of course you've talked about collaboration, but then there's a need for an equitable communication channel or a viable communication channel that can help both parties understand what needs to be achieved and how that can be done. So I'd like you to define how you feel these private businesses can communicate more with the youth in the country in terms of information sharing and receiving to actually actualize the SDG initiatives for the country.
So what our data are showing, and there's some other research involved as well in this, is young people want to know that business is doing something good, and they do know. They want to see what businesses are doing with these sustainable development goals. They're saying that, tell us when you've got a good result. We want to know about this. Not too many details on statistics and technical, just give us the information and we understand it. That also means that they want this through a channel that they can actually consume. So as a big corporate business, your communication methods, your marketing methods might be focused on websites and newspapers, for example. But young people are saying, talk to us on the media that we use. So that's social media. That would be TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever that might be. The young people are saying, talk to us in a way that we consume this information, because then there's a way for us to speak back to you again. We are not looking at websites as often as we are looking at social media. So I think that's a key message for big companies. The young people want to know what you're doing. They want to know about your successes, but make sure that your social media team is very much involved in this, because communicating with young people is different from communicating with your staff, and your leadership, and your investors.
So that would mean that a lot rests on the shoulders of these companies, whether big or small, in terms of their capacity. But then I'm wondering if the government in South Africa actually provides that enabling environment for these private businesses to thrive. I'm looking at policies, I'm looking at, a conducive environment, I'm looking at partnership and initiatives that would help these businesses grow so that they can also, meet with their CSRs and the impact they are meant to make in the country. Is that what's happening in South Africa right now?
You've got a very valid point. We need private business to thrive, to be able to create jobs, create revenue, because that's how you impact communities. So on the question of, do we have an enabling environment, we can make a long list of challenges: electricity, water, infrastructure, etc. Right now, as we're talking here today, we've got quite a few good news items. We've had for many years electricity outages almost on a daily basis, which for the past few months we've avoided, which is very good news. We've had a decline in inflation, a cost of living crisis that most countries felt in the world, so there's good news. We also have recently had elections. We've got a new government, and within that government, within that cabinet, we have more representation of different political parties than we've had for quite a few decades. So in terms of the sentiment around South Africa at the moment is actually quite positive. If we look at our exchange rate, if we look at our stock exchange, our government bonds, the way that international investors price these, they are saying there's positive news, there's good things happening. Our exchange rate is strong. Our stock exchange is at another all-time high. Bond yields are coming down. So the voice and the message about the enabling environment is better. We still have a long way to go. We've got very slow economic growth, many challenges with job creation. But at the moment, I'd say we're probably on a better situation than we've been for quite a few years, and the latest business and consumer sentiment surveys are showing this. So yes, moving in the right direction. Obviously, many things still left to do, but for private business, it is actually a relatively good situation in terms of investor sentiment.
Okay, thank you very much, Christie Viljoen, Senior Economist, Senior Manager at PwC South Africa. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you.